everyone, and welcome to our 8th edition of Women on the Frontlines Conference 2020, organized by the Chidiac Foundation Media Institute in collaboration with UNWomen. This year is definitely one for the ages, seeing that we are in the middle of a global pandemic. As always, we aim to see the glass half full, and that is translated by our unwavering commitment to resume our activities, despite the difficulties that not just the country, but the whole world is facing. We come to you today with our annual Women on the Frontlines conference, broadcasted in a hybrid formula that merges our studios at the MCF Media Institute in Beirut and online networks such as Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. Despite all the misfortunes that have crippled us in Lebanon, including a pandemic, an economic crisis, and an explosion, we have not given up. It is especially at such times that it becomes indispensable to highlight the role of women and their outstanding tenacity in shaping their country and the world. I'm very happy to welcome our dear guest, Rachel Dore-Weeks, head of the UNWomen in Lebanon. Hello, Rachel. As always, it is wonderful to have you with us today. It is with gratitude and pleasure that we collaborate with UNWomen this year, given our common goal to fight gender-based violence and making women's lives better in our communities. Although a virus impacts everyone and does not discriminate against anyone, we cannot underestimate the pandemic's impact on gender pay gap and women's representation in the workforce, especially in the most vulnerable corners of the world. Coupled with economic deprivation, Lebanese women have been bearing the brunt of a health crisis and the remnants of a destructive explosion that occurred in the port of Beirut on August 4, 2020. But now, before we begin our conversation, I will leave the floor to you, dear Rachel, for your introductory remarks.
Excellency, thank you. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us at this challenging time and at the end of a challenging year, a year that has questioned what we know and how we work. And thank you to Her Excellency Chidiac and the Chidiac Foundation for hosting another important discussion on women on the front lines. This year, the conference examines the important role that women play in peace and security deliberations here in Lebanon, across the region, and globally. And it looks how we can collectively address the threats posed by increased insecurity, threats to women's insecurity both inside and outside the household. We're having this discussion at a time of crisis here in Lebanon and amidst growing calls for change. Our discussion also comes at a time when the world is celebrating 20 years since the passage of the first Women, Peace and Security resolution in the Security Council, a resolution that has served as a unified call and common recognition of the importance of how women address issues of global peace and security. To paraphrase my executive director, Famzila Malambo Nguka, women remain trapped in wars created by men. And despite all of the evidence that shows that peace processes which involve women are key to long-lasting peace, women are still systematically excluded from them and confined to informal processes and relegated to the roles of spectators, while men sit in the rooms that define their lives and our future. In response to their demands for inclusion in these spaces, women are provided with a surplus of supportive words and statements and a deficit of real action that could work to break down the boundaries that perpetrate inequalities, the boundaries that block women's engagement. And this is because we believe as a society and as a world that women's participation is still an add-on. It's an unnecessary addition that dilutes the hard work of politics and that will distract men from the real work that they need to do. We've been saying this for too long, and we'll keep repeating it. We can no longer afford to think this way. We can no longer afford for women to be excluded from political spaces and dialogues, and we must try new models of peacemaking and peace building, particularly when we know that women's engagement makes a positive difference. Lebanon currently ranks 145th out of 153 countries on the Global Gender Equality Gap Index, ahead only of Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen in this region. And this is despite the positive changes we've seen and fought for over the last decade. And while women make up 30% of the current caretaker cabinet, they represent only 4.7% of women in parliament, 5.4% of the country's municipal councillors, 1.9% of Mukhtars, and 1.9% of mayors. This exclusion from positions of decision-making and authority, both at the local and the national level, translates into exclusion from peace and security deliberations across the country. Women did not participate in the Taif Accords that brought the civil war to a halt in 1991, nor any subsequent national dialogues. More recently, they've again been excluded from the political deliberations following the October 2019 popular protests and the 2020 Beirut explosion, and recently again excluded from Lebanon's delegation to the maritime talks. This is despite the fact that Lebanon has a history that is benchmarked by women who have defied the odds, who have risked their safety for themselves and their families to call for peace, inclusion, and change. Women who have proven their ability to intervene peacefully, to broker consensus, and to de-escalate tensions during conflict. Yet their calls for inclusion and engagement in peace and security continues to be met with these outdated assertions that now is not the time for this, and that there are no qualified women to be found. This is despite all of the evidence to the contrary, that this is about efficiency and not tokenism, and that qualified women continue to present themselves in droves. In Lebanon and across the world, women are calling for inclusion and representation. Young women and young peace builders are ready to work. They want change and they want to be included. They do not want to be bystanders to their country's future, and they are unwilling to accept the slow pace of progress nor the possibility of reversal. They know there's too much at stake, and we know this too. If we are to set a different path forward, we must also change how we view the role of women in public spaces and rethink the ways in which we approach peacemaking and peace building. Lebanon's National Action Plan on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the National Action Plans on Women, Peace and Security across the region put forward a new vision on how peacemaking and peace building can be done. So as we begin 2 days of discussion, let me finish my remarks with touching on the 5 goals set forward by the Secretary General this October during the Women, Peace and Security celebration of 20 years. Goal 1, it's on women's meaningful participation. It calls for us to take a radical shift in how we support women's equal and meaningful participation in peacemaking and peace building. Inclusion must be non-negotiable for all of us. Goal 2 calls for the unconditional defense of women's rights. Together, we must be the loudest voice in the defense of equality and in addressing impunity of men in perpetuating violence against women. Goals 3 and 4 call for changes in how we allocate and spend money. They call for governments to fund the social infrastructure and essential services that underpin human security, and to ensure that women's rights organizations remain a priority for our support. And finally, Goal 5 reminds us that what isn't counted doesn't get counted. It calls for us to close the gender data gap in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a cornerstone to achieving peace and security. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to be with us and to engage in this important conversation. As we continue, we must be guided by the reminder set by the Security Council. What is needed now is not more words, but more action.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for your introductory remarks. No one can ignore the importance of the goals you just mentioned. Let's start with our questions for today. Women's participation in the workforce, particularly in health, politics, media, and activism, has always been part of the Lebanese society. It has always been a matter of acknowledging and mirroring their contribution into political representation, whether in parliament, cabinet, or other positions of higher office. Do you think that women's role in the political sphere will change this time around, especially since public trust towards government has monumentally declined? Will they be part of an attempt to look progressive or feminist, or will it involve brilliant women in specialized positions where they can affect positive change in Lebanon? If it's the latter, how do you think this will materialize in a patriarchal society?
Thank you. It's a good question. I think women who have held the role in cabinet previously have now set the benchmark high, including women like yourself. We are seeing progressively more women in cabinet. We're now at 30%, the highest across the region. And I would hope there's no rolling back from here. I would hope that every cabinet from here on in, whether it's this one or future cabinets, have at least 30% as the benchmark from which we can't come back from.
Let's hope so. It's not so sure for the upcoming government.
Let's hope so. We have to be optimistic.
Yes, of course.
And I also think that the issue you pose in terms of whether there'll be brilliant women or whether it will be window dressing is an interesting one, but it's also one that we too infrequently ask it of men. So my opinion is that women in any form matter. As you say, they mirror what's happening within the public and the private space, and they show that women belong in these positions. So we hope, of course, that the women who are in these positions are feminists and talk about issues of gender equality and women's rights and peace and security. But at some point, it's just about representation. It's showing that we belong in those spaces.
According to the Lebanese Ministry of Public Health, in a 2013 journal article, a most recent statistic, the number of women comprised 79% of the public workforce in the healthcare system, with the private sector providing 80.5% of the total employment. Of course, the numbers definitely have changed in the past years, but women continue to be a massive part of the national health infrastructure. What does that say about women's status in society, considering their vast contribution to the country's healthcare system?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen now more than ever the importance of the healthcare infrastructure. COVID has proven to us that often an industry that we think is secondary to politics or industrial growth is actually primary to both our economy and allowing us to function. And as you say, women form the backbone of this. So I think it's about recognizing the role that women are playing, both paid and unpaid, in the home, in the care economy, but also in the public space and being paid for it, and giving that the merit that it deserves, recognizing that this is a key contribution to society that women are making.
With Lebanon still reeling from the fallout of that devastating explosion in Beirut, and also from an ongoing economic crisis, access to women's healthcare services is becoming problematic. Are there any solutions to this problem? How can women take care of themselves, considering financial and social strains, especially when mental health is involved?
So I think it's important for us all to remind the decision makers that women's healthcare is not something that can be negotiated away. When we're talking about moments of fiscal crisis, when we're prioritizing what we spend our money on, things that support women's healthcare enable us to remain healthy, enable us to remain reproductively active, and also enable us to remain active within the household and in the public space, are critical to social functioning. So that goes from ensuring that things like sanitary towels are subsidized in the debate that was had, recognizing that this is a key input for women's healthcare, but also towards the whole spectrum. So we know, or we think, that at some point there might be more difficult choices to be made in terms of what the government is spending its money on. And I think reminding them and ensuring that they continue to spend their money on subsidizing women's healthcare will be critical to how Lebanon recovers.
Sometimes we have doubts about what you are asking the government to do, because maybe not all the strategies are for the best of the Lebanese community, and especially for women. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we need now is to be demanding decision-making to be inclusive. I think when decision-making is exclusive of a very small minority, it will never represent what everyone is asking for. And so at this point, all we can do is keep demanding new governance systems and more inclusion to make sure, as you're saying, those decisions are inclusive and they do include the priorities of everyone.
Yeah, sure. With nationwide lockdowns imposed, schools closed, many workers were furloughed, laid off, or told to work from home. With personal movement limited and people confined to their homes, advocates expressed concern about a potential increase in domestic violence. Stay-at-home orders intended to protect the public and prevent widespread infection left many victims trapped with their abusers. In a country like Lebanon, where laws are often ignored or simply against women's interests, what can one do to not only fight this reality, but also in the face of a pandemic to make women feel like they are not alone and that they have options? This question also goes to child abuse.
The first thing is impunity. We have to tackle this culture of impunity that suggests that violence against women is normal and that it's acceptable. We see very little happening within the justice spectrum around making it clear to perpetrators of violence against women that it is unacceptable and that perpetrators will face justice and criminal proceedings for doing so. So until it's a society that we're modeling that this is completely unacceptable, that there will be ramifications for violence against women, it's understandable that it's continued to seen as something that is acceptable and appropriate in some spheres. So we both need to be working with the justice sector to make sure that in context of COVID that sentences are still being brought down, and we need to be supporting victims and survivors to have trust within the justice sector and be coming forward to hold perpetrators accountable for violence.
The problem in Lebanon is that we have laws, but most of the time they are not implemented, and this is the big issue. And the confessional considerations always make things more difficult, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
We talked about workers being laid off or furloughed just recently. Time stated that 49% of women in Lebanon reported job losses compared to 21% of men. Even without looking into the details of this gap, it is not comforting for young women who are either fresh graduates or are looking to launch their careers. What advice can we offer them in these difficult times? What can they do to sharpen their skills or grow professionally when they are already bearing the brunt of economic and political blows?
I think it's a good question that there's no easy answer to. I think we're in a moment where we know that we're going to see job losses for everyone, and in particular for women. So women, girls who are, young women and girls who are entering the economy, how they're able to get a foothold in and to have jobs that are decent jobs that provide them with the healthcare and the benefits they need, in addition to a safe working environment, will be very scarce. So I think all we can say to girls that are in school, young women that are graduating, is that they belong in the workforce. I think they're too often told that they don't belong in the workforce. They're told that they belong at home, they belong doing unpaid care work. Yeah. So women like you and others reminding them they belong in the workforce, they need to keep trying, but also trying to ensure that a lot of the employment programs that are out there are actively targeting women, and again reinforcing that message and helping them get one step in. Yeah. So I think it's accepting it's going to be a difficult few years, but asking them to keep trying and keep ensuring that they remain in the workforce.
We promise to keep trying. It's not always easy.
We promise
easy
to
say, not easy
also.
to get. Anyway, Rachel, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for our collaboration this year to organize Women on the Frontlines conference in its hybrid formula with the UNWomen. Thanks to your help and your support, we've been achieving something that others maybe find it difficult to do. The hybrid formula is very special and unique to the Chidiac Foundation Media Institute. Thank you for coming to our studios and being part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us in the partnership and persevering.
Thank you.